In the late 1950s and early 60s, live sport was beamed into American homes for the first time. Audiences seeking out golf were rewarded with a real-life soap opera that saw three men from very different backgrounds immersed in a classic rivalry. It ensured golf was part of the American zeitgeist. This was the time of Palmer, Nicklaus and Player. It was the age of the Big Three.
It was kind of the battle to the general public, who's going to win each week.
The crowds rush up to witness the climax of the Professional Golfers Association Championship at Newton Square, Pennsylvania. Player sinks the short one, and his .278 total wins the PGA.
When Gary Player won the 1962 PGA Championship, it gave the Big Three a clean sweep of that year's major tournaments. In just 5 years, Player, along with the newly dubbed King, Arnold Palmer, and the 22-year-old Jack Nicklaus, had ushered in a new era for the sport. In a time when golf was dominated by terrific players and big personalities, no one could touch the Big Three.
It was just great to watch the three of them play.
They wanted to play like men, to beat each other.
We wanted to win. We wanted to be the best.
It's amazing those three guys, Arnold and Jack and Gary, didn't start their own tour.
We had a wonderful rivalry between the three of us.
We wanted to beat each other's brains out. There's no question about it.
We did make it clear to each other, we want to beat the living hang out of you.
Jackie's going, whoo, and I'm going, phew.
And when we lost, it was always, watch out for me next week.
By the 1950s, golf was at a crossroads. With stars like Ben Hogan and Sam Snead in the twilight of their careers, fans were on the lookout for a new hero. Up stepped a man who would turn out to be golf's first superstar.
There was no one like Arnold Palmer. He played super. He had that burning desire, that killing instinct, that will to win.
He was every man's player. I mean, that Latrobe, Pennsylvania, shirt hanging out half the time, smoking a cigarette, ripping at every flag, taking every chance.
The ex-Marine, the muscular, cigarette-smoking guy with a wink at the girls and a smile for everybody else. And 100 years earlier, you could imagine that Arnold would have been the sort of guy who had taken his wagon across the prairies and was now clearing some trees down to build his little wooden cabin.
For American golf fans, Palmer was something new. If Hogan and Snead were calm, clinical and technical, Palmer played with fire and skill, passion and heart. And he did so to a burgeoning audience.
The great good luck for golf that happened was that in the 1950s, as television in America really expanded and really began to show lots more live sport, is that Arnold Palmer emerged at that time.
Television showcased his talents and his like of the people. It was fun to watch.
I think he caught the fancy of the public because he hit a lot of shots like they hit. And because of his vast talent, he was able to overcome those shots and make spectacular shots. And that was very entertaining to the public.
People never knew what he was going to do. The par five, maybe someone else hadn't gone for it in two, but Arnold would get up there and bam, and go for it, maybe win the tournament by a stroke. They never knew.
His smile and his charisma was just always on stage. He'd look at you and smile, and it'd make you feel like you were the only person in the world.
Palmer reveled in playing to the gallery, but he also played to win. His first major was the 1958 Masters. 2 years later, he needed 2 birdies on the final 2 holes to give himself a chance of winning his second green jacket.
Crowd is hushed as Palmer shoots. It's good. He does it again. One of golfing's top trophies for a man of steel, Arnold Palmer.
1960 also saw him win the US Open for the first time. Despite trailing leader Mike Suchak by 7 shots on the final day, Palmer shot a 7-under par 65 to wipe out the lead and win his 3rd major in as many years. Meanwhile, as Palmer was making waves in America, a determined South African called Gary Player was starting to make a name for himself.
Everything Gary wanted to do, he did. He didn't do anything halfway.
Of the great things Gary had, he had obviously great talent, but he had a huge heart. He had a huge commitment to win. and to be as good as he could possibly be.
Gary was not the best player. He was not the best striker. He was not the best driver. He wasn't the best iron player, but he was the best scorer. He found a way to get the ball in the hole and get the number up.
No bigger than this, you know. Remarkable determination and mind, and he was a tough little sod. Everybody was bigger and stronger. It didn't make any difference. You couldn't stop him.
Hailing from Johannesburg, Player already had a disadvantage. He had to factor in travel to his preparations.
If you're a champion, you must learn to adjust. Now, it was much more difficult for me to travel from South Africa, and particularly in those days, it took in the early or the late 50s and early 60s 40 hours to fly here. So I had to compete against very difficult conditions, but I liked that. I liked the fact that I trained my mind to do this.
It was that single-mindedness that underpinned Gary Player's career.
I think this is about 1957. He says, "Laddie, I'm going to win all 4 major championships in my life." Only in 1953 was Hogan, the second guy to win at Carnoustie, to become the second guy to win the 4 majors. Now, he hasn't even played in a tournament, much less won one, much less won a major. And I started to laugh at him. We still talk about this. And I looked at him for a minute, and I put my glasses against his, and I said, "You'll be the type guy to do that."
In 1959, Player faced testing conditions as he chased his first major, the Open Championship.
I needed a 4 for 66 in that wind with that old equipment and got a double bogey on the last hole.
Well, that's in. It's a fine round, but it might have been so much fun.
Getting a double bogey, I thought, oh, I've blown it. And I walked off there and I was almost in tears. And my wife was consoling me, but it eventually turned out all right.
2 years later, Player was in contention for the Masters, 1 shot behind the leader as the final day dawned. But that leader was Arnold Palmer, on the verge of his 3rd Masters.
The people almost got in a screaming match. Let's say there are 30 or 40,000 people there on the last day. I had 1 person pulling for me, or 2. It was my wife and my dog. But I loved that challenge.
Palmer needed a par for victory, but playing to the gallery took its toll. The great American lost his focus.
I made a fatal mistake, having driven it right in the middle of the fairway. I saw an old friend at the sidelines, and he was motioning for me to come over to say hello, and I did that. And he shook hands, congratulating me on winning the tournament. Well, I knew better, but I was sort of a victim of circumstances then, and a weak mind also. And I accepted those congratulations.
And look out, it's in the sand.
The iron shot was very poor. And then, rather than being sure to get it on the green and have a putt for a par, I went strongly for the pin, and I caught it a little bit thin, and it went over the green.
A bogey 5 meant a playoff, but the usually cool Palmer had gone to pieces. His double bogey meant Player won his first Masters title.
I wanted to show these people I can beat him. Not only beat him on the golf course, but I can beat him with all your screaming and pulling for him.
That's probably one of the most bitter defeats that I've had in my life.
I accepted it as a great challenge and won, which made me feel good.
Returning to Augusta a year later, Palmer found himself up against Player once again. This time, it was the South African who couldn't handle the occasion.
I was 2 shots ahead with 3 holes to go. I said to my caddy, unforgivably so, "We've won."
After the disappointment of 12 months earlier, Palmer was determined not to lose. He pulled it back on the last 3 holes to force a playoff.
We went into an 18-hole playoff. I was out in 33, he was out in 36. Came back in 31 to beat me. And that was tough to take.
Arnold Palmer was back on top. He'd beaten his main rival, and Player aside, there was no one to touch him. But 2 years earlier, when Palmer was producing his comeback to win the US Open, he'd noticed the performance of the unknown amateur who'd finished second. An amateur named Jack Nicklaus.
Jack could will himself into doing things that I think were impossible. I've seen it.
His ability to concentrate, I mean, it's just phenomenal.
I never saw him swearing or throwing clubs or losing his temper. He was a perfectionist.
By 1962, Nicklaus had turned professional. He entered the fray at that year's US Open. Oakmont in Pennsylvania was Palmer's local course. But the youngster was at home.
Being American, to me, the championship of your home country has to be the most important tournament for you. I love USGA golf courses. I love the setup. I felt that that was my week. I didn't even know that Arnold Palmer was from the Pittsburgh area. You know, I mean, I was just going there to play a golf tournament.
On the final green, both Nicklaus and Palmer missed putts to win the title, so the pair went head-to-head in a playoff. If the support was with Palmer, Nicklaus remained unfazed.
I didn't hear anything, but you know, it wouldn't have made any difference to me anyway. I mean, I had blinders on. I was there to win a golf tournament. It didn't make any difference to me who was in the field or anything else. I was oblivious to everything.
It was the seasoned Palmer who was more nervous. He finished the playoff 3 over. The young Nicklaus kept his cool, finishing level par to win not only his first major, but his first professional title. Afterwards, Palmer joked, "Now the big guy's out of the cage, we'd better all run for cover." Nicklaus had become the brightest star on the circuit, but Palmer's fans, known as Arnie's Army, had their own hero and their own agenda.
They didn't like the fact that the pudgy fat kid was destroying Arnold.
Jack was fat and had a bit of a squeaky voice. I vividly remember they were standing at the US Open with a sign here at a bunker. "Hit it here, Ohio Fats."
I can say it was tough to play with Arnold. They were out there to see him, and they were out to see some of the other players that he played with. So when you played with him, you had to be extremely patient to wait till all the people calmed down after he putted out.
Arnold would hold a 3-foot putt, and they would roar, and Jack would hold a 20-foot putt, and it would be a very quiet applause.
If they were going to boo him, then he wanted to show those people that he was, you know, they have a reason to boo him because he's better.
Palmer wasn't about to throw in the towel. July 1962 saw him win his second successive Open Championship, his 6th major at Royal Troon. And when Gary Player captured the year's final major, the USPGA, there was little doubt that he, Palmer and Nicklaus were in a league of their own, and their success would transform sport. In 1960, Mark McCormack had founded the International Management Group and made Arnold Palmer his first client. Within a couple of years, he added both Player and Nicklaus to his roster. The Big Three was born.
The Big Three started in 1962. Arnold won Masters and the British Open. I won the US Open and Gary won the PGA. And we had the first World Series of golf. And it just sort of popped up. And Sir McCormack figured out, I think I'll just slip that little Big Three out there. And that sort of stuck, and that was the start of it.
Mark McCormack was instrumental. He was getting bigger tournaments. He was doing things for television that had never been done before. The timing was absolutely superb.
They wanted to see next week, well, did Arnold win? Did Jack win another one? Did Gary get in there, you know? It was kind of the battle to the general public, who's going to win each week.
In 1963, Nicklaus continued to win, adding the USPGA to his first Masters title. He received his first green jacket from the man who was his biggest rival, Arnold Palmer. 12 months on, and the roles were reversed as Palmer won his 7th major. And nothing gave Arnie more satisfaction than beating Jack.
Well, I can understand that, because all of a sudden, you know, a guy comes along, you know, and starts taking over your titles and everything. I was trying to think about a boxer, you know, you've been a great champion, a guy come in and beat you a couple of times. Well, you really enjoyed, you know, having another fight and beating him back.
Of course, Arnold was the king, and all of a sudden you had a guy that was taking pieces of the throne away, if you would.
I think that Arnold respected himself more to have had to work harder to achieve that goal, so he felt better about himself.
In 1965, it was Jack who triumphed once again at Augusta. Palmer and Player tied for second, a massive 9 shots behind.
Jack won it convincingly, and I remember Sports Illustrated had a picture of Jack and Arnold and I standing next to him with the jacket around the three of us. That was quite a thrill.
If the crowds were warming to Nicklaus, Palmer remained their undisputed favourite.
The rivalry was based really on the fact that A, they were outstanding players, but B, they were such contrasting characters.
Jack was very oriented to the major championships, and Palmer loved to play anywhere where there was a gallery.
Some people are fed by emotion. I always found that the more emotion that I had, the more chance I had of getting out of control.
Jack came to the last hole of the US Open at Pebble Beach, needing a 5 to win. Took a 2-iron off the tee. He eliminated going out of bounds. He eliminated going to the ocean. Arnold would take out their driver, they'd have a go and put it in the ocean. Or he'd put it in the fairway and get an eagle.
Gary Player was quietly going about his business. In 1965, 8 years after telling Doug Sanders he would win the Grand Slam, he stood on the verge of doing just that.
Then I've got to win the US Open now to complete the Grand Slam, and only Hogan and Gene Sarris have done it, nobody else. Nicklaus was trying to do it, Palmer's trying to do it, and I win the US Open. And I did mind training there like you've never seen, and I was squatting with 325 pounds the night before I won. I was the fittest I ever was in my life.
Player makes history in capturing a title that has long eluded him. To top it all, he gave his caddy $1,000 and a $1,000 tip.
That was a big thrill for me to beat Jack Nicklaus to win the Grand Slam.
He had that drive more than any man I've ever known. But he didn't stop at it. He said it, and he went to it until he reached it.
Gary is rather a tiny man, yet he would stand alongside these two giants of the game in Palmer and Nicklaus, and he would match them inch for inch, and quite often go a bit further as well.
Arnold Palmer required the US PGA to complete his Grand Slam, coming closest with a second place in 1964. By 1966, having been usurped by both Player and Nicklaus, he was desperate for any significant victory. The US Open provided his best chance of adding to his 7 majors, as he built an almost unassailable lead over second-placed Billy Casper.
What a performance! His lead has ballooned to 7 strokes, with only 9 holes to play.
But Palmer's rivalry with Nicklaus was affecting his thinking.
There were a number of major tournaments that we got to playing each other. And of course, both of us knew the rule. You don't play each other in a medal play tournament. You play to win the golf tournament, but we got playing each other so hard that we blew the tournament. Someone else came right by and beat us both.
Going down the 10th hole, I'll never forget Bill saying to me something about he had to really get going or Nicklaus was going to beat him for second place. And I encouraged him. I said, well, you know, don't worry, you'll finish second. And never thinking what I was saying. Never giving a thought to the fact that my father taught me that once you get them down, keep them there, don't let them up. And I was just doing the exact opposite. I was opening the door and opened it.
Casper pulled back 7 shots over the last 8 holes to force a playoff, which he won to end Palmer's hopes of an 8th major.
Well, I think he changed his goal. He thought he couldn't lose.
Well, I never got nightmares about it. Certainly I was very upset.
Friends that are mine and friends that are Arnold's said he was never the same after that.
If Palmer was never to win another major, off the course, rivalries continued. As the world's highest-earning sportsman, Palmer undoubtedly led the way.
He was the first one to branch out doing all the golf courses and all of this and doing that and doing this, you know, but still there, you know, now he's got the Arnold Palmer drink. I mean, he was always doing something other, doing golf outings and helping kids and so forth.
Then Nicklaus lost a lot of weight, grew his hair a bit longer, and suddenly turned out to be this rather good-looking sort of beach ball type character. But he still remained the same conservative, cunning strategist. Not reclusive, but rather more conservative in his dealings with people.
I think Arnold could have pretty well done whatever he desired to do, but sometimes other things sneak in there and take over some of your time. We only have so much time, 24 hours a day, that's all we have. So, and at times it becomes more valuable to do this and that rather than to win.
Gary Player concentrated on his career. In 1968, he was in direct competition with Nicklaus for a major title, as the two faced off in the 1968 Open Championship.
I stayed 2 shots ahead of him until the last hole. I played short, so I was scared he would eagle the hole and I would probably go in a playoff.
But the South African held off Jack to win by 2 shots. Player now had 5 major titles. By July 1970, it had been 2 years since any of the big three had won a major. But at St Andrews, it was Nicklaus who stole a march on his rivals to win major title number 8.
Jack made the putt. He took the putter and threw it way up in the air. And I looked around and I didn't see the putter. There's only one place it could be over my head. And I'm putting my hands up here, and Jack ran over and putting his hands over my head to keep me getting hit. I said, Jack, it's bad enough to beat me, but you don't have to hit me upside the head with a putter, you know. Oh, Doug, I'm sorry, you know.
I never played for records. I never had a goal. I can't imagine playing the game of golf through my career and worrying about what I was going to do next to put on the record book. And loved competing in the game. I loved the game because I loved winning. I loved the competition, the challenge of being able to control myself. I can't control anybody else. I'm the only person I can control. My goal was just to play and be the best I could be when I was doing it.
Nicklaus kept on breaking records. The 1970s saw him win another 7 majors, while Player won 4 more, including the 1974 Open Championship, becoming the first player to win the title in 3 separate decades. The desire of both men remained equal, but their methods were very different.
I wanted to be the best, and I exercised and I trained and I watched my diet and I worked on my mind. I mean, the fact that I might get a disease and get sick tomorrow, that's possible. But there are very few 30-year-olds that would beat me in a physical fitness contest in the gym today, unless he's a real, stud who works in the gym all the time. But if you took 100 people off the street at 30 years of age, I'd kill him in the gym.
Right from the start, Jack Nicklaus was determined to win more majors than anybody else had ever won. That's all he was interested in. He didn't care about the Mickey Mouse, whatever it was, or the Donald Duck, something else. He wanted either the Masters, the US Open, the Open Championship, or the US PGA Championship.
1978 saw Player win his final major, triumphing in the Masters for the 3rd time. His record of 9 majors was surpassed only by Jack, Walter Hagen, and 3 decades later, Tiger Woods. Player, though, insists he could have achieved more.
There's no question, had I lived in America, I would have won a lot more majors than I did. There's no question about it. I often never even played in some of the majors. This is something that a lot of people don't realize.
Nicklaus continued winning tournaments into the 1980s and captured his 18th and final major title at the 86 Masters on an unforgettable day at Augusta. From 1958 to 1986, he, Player and Palmer shared an incredible 34 majors. 3 men with 3 different personalities, different playing styles, but one thing in common: to be a winner. And even today, the fire still burns.
If you look at Arnold, Jack and myself, I'm 77 and Jack's considerably younger. In a fitness contest, I mean, it would be me against them would be like against a 5-year-old. Really, no, it's not a case of boasting, it's a case of an absolute fact. You're never boasting if something is a fact.
Sporting rivalries are always competitive, some are bitter. A few have a place for genuine friendship and love.
We had great battles together and it was just fantastic.
They loved it. They loved each other, how they fought each other. And they had some really cute names that I can't mention on camera for each other.
When you take those 3 players and throw them in the mix, it was just shattering. It was just great to watch the 3 of them play.
We had a great rivalry with respect to each other, wanting to beat each other desperately, but in the meantime realizing we were going to win some and lose some, and we've remained good friends ever since.
In 2012, the Big Three returned to Augusta, the stage for some of their fiercest battles. The trio, with 13 green jackets between them, hit ceremonial shots to start the Masters. A nice way to celebrate a rivalry dating back 50 years.
That was exciting for the three of us who'd been together for so long to actually hit off in the Masters. Jack used to say, I'll never do that. And I didn't think I wanted to do that. And obviously we succumbed, if that's the word. And I'm so pleased that we agreed to do that. It was exciting, and particularly for me, because all my career they'd outdriven me. So I was able to hit and outdrive them by 26 yards and say, you're away.